The 1972 Miami Dolphins, the only truly perfect team in NFL history. Others have come close, but none can say definitively that they won every game on their way to a Super Bowl victory. The 72 Dolphins made every play they needed when they needed it, and capitalized on every opportunity afforded to them in order to earn their ticket to perfection. But it wasn't just a walk in the park. There were several close calls throughout the year. So join me as I take a dive into the 1972 season and explore the journey of this special team. But before I get started, I want to give a shout out to my main source of information for this video. If you are a fan of the Miami Dolphins, I highly encourage you read the outstanding journalism of Cameron Wolfe, who conducted many interviews and pieced together a fantastic article for NFL.com. The link to that is in the description of this video, so please check that out for more details and fun stories about this team. Alright, now the story of the 1972 Dolphins can actually be traced to the ending of the 1971 Dolphins, who fell short in Super Bowl VI, getting crushed 24-3 against the Dallas Cowboys. It was this game that would be required to achieve the levels of success reached by the 72 Dolphins. It starts with the heart and soul of the team, head coach Don Shula. He implanted the pain of that loss into the minds of every player on the team, forcing them to watch the Super Bowl loss over and over again. Shula brought his level of intensity to unseen levels, working his players to borderline criminal levels, striving for nothing short of perfect. He would run drills on repeat until they were done perfectly. Shula was determined to shake the monkey off his back, having now lost 2 Super Bowls in his career, and it would stop at nothing to achieve a championship victory. He recognized that his coaching legacy was in doubt, and nothing short of winning a Super Bowl would correct that, and so he coached the players harder than he ever had before, and it worked. The Dolphins plowed through their first 2 games of the season with relative ease, beating the Kansas City Chiefs in their opening of the brand new Arrowhead Stadium 20-10, and then an absolute beatdown of the Houston Oilers. To put into perspective, the Oilers quarterback completed 3 of 10 passes for negative 10 yards in the first half of that game. It was really that bad. The Dolphins would end up with a 34-13 victory over the Oilers, but it was week 3 where Miami got their first real test. Their opponent was the Minnesota Vikings, who were led by a fearsome group of defense known as the Purple People Eaters. Only 5 minutes into the game, that ferocious defense would already be on the attack, as the Dolphins were already trailing due to a 56-yard touchdown from Fran Tarkenton. Miami would be scoreless entering halftime, with their 3-0 record on the line early. However, an interception by the Miami defense would set up a 51-yard field goal to put points on the board. A second field goal would bring the score to 6-7. Yet on the very first play of the fourth quarter, the Vikings would score another touchdown, bringing the deficit to 13 points. But the Dolphins continued to hack away, with another field goal as time continued to tick, now 9-14. But the Dolphins defense continued to show up, and forced another punt as the game was coming towards the end. Quarterback Bob Griese would march the Dolphins down the field before it stalled in the red zone at the hands of the Purple People Eaters. It was now 4th down, the Dolphins trailing by 5. Griese looked to pass, and was hit by Vikings defensive lineman Bob Lertsema, which should have ended any hope for the Dolphins. Yet the refs would throw a rather controversial flag for roughing the passer that kept the drive alive. And sure enough, the Dolphins would score a touchdown with only 88 seconds remaining in the game. The Miami defense would hold off, and the Dolphins would remain undefeated. At the end of the day, it was the so-called no-name defense of the Miami Dolphins and their 5 sacks and 3 interceptions that won the game, instead of the notorious Vikings defense. Also, the roughing the passer call certainly helped, and the Dolphins offense knew it. In an interview conducted by Cameron Wolfe's article, Lertsema said this about the flag, quote, "I got a thank you card from offensive lineman Bob Kuechenberg and Jim Langer because I was the reason they were undefeated. I burned it. It was a terrible call. I put my fist up in the air, said we won, and I bumped into Griese walking backward. The referee said it was roughing the passer. I couldn't believe it." End quote. But the Dolphins' luck would flip 2 weeks later, as the victory against the Vikings wouldn't come close to the greatest adversity the 72 Dolphins would face. Following a Week 4 win over the Jets 27-17, the Dolphins would face the San Diego Chargers. In the very first quarter of the game, future Hall of Fame quarterback Bob Griese would take a hit that both broke his tibia and dislocated his ankle in an injury that would make onlookers queasy. Dolphins fullback Larry Csonka said he could literally hear the bones snap, and described it as one of the most sickening things he he's witnessed in his entire career. But luckily for the Dolphins, Coach Don Shula had prepared a contingency plan. During the offseason, he had hired the longtime veteran quarterback Earl Morrall, the 17-year veteran, to serve as the backup. The 38-year-old was a former MVP under Shula's Baltimore Colts during the late 60s, with his experience playing dating all the way back to the mid-1950s. Shula had full belief in him, which is why he argued for Miami's owner to dish out the money for the veteran quarterback in the first place. But it also helps that the Dolphins' offense ran mostly through their run game anyways, a three-headed monster on the ground between Hall of Fame fullback Larry Csonka and Pro Bowl running backs Mercury Morris and Jim Kiick. The Dolphins' offense really wouldn't miss much of a beat as they trudged forward, beating the Chargers 24-10, then in a close call beating the Bills 24-23 in Week 6. But from there, it was relatively smooth sailing, as the team beat the Baltimore Colts 23-0, then beat the Bills in a rematch 30-16, embarrassing the Patriots with a 52-0 victory in Week 9, a 24-28 win over the Jets in Week 10, and now entering the final month of the season, the Dolphins would beat the St. Louis Cardinals on Monday Night Football 31-10, followed by a 37-21 win over the Patriots and a 23-13 victory over the New York Giants in Week 13. Finally, we reached the final game of the season, the Dolphins sitting at a 13-0 record, something that none of them had really planned on doing. The undefeated record just kind of happened. The ultimate goal all along, and still was, winning the Super Bowl. But they would be lying to themselves if the temptation of going undefeated wasn't weighing on their minds. Tony Segreto, an NFL broadcaster covering the Dolphins in the 1970s, said in an interview for Cameron Wolfe's article, quote, "There's no question as the season went on, the players could see the significance of being undefeated. You could see and feel the intensity change. Coaches walked differently. Players tensed up in interviews. Publicly, they would say nothing changed. Privately, they would tell you this is different now with an undefeated record." End quote. But the players would of course deny this, saying it was all media hype and their focus was always on the Super Bowl, so take that as you will. Now here we were, the final game of the season, a rematch against the Baltimore Colts. The pressure was on to finish the regular season undefeated. The Dolphins would win 16-0. Well, that was easy, but now the real pressure was on. The team had gone undefeated for the entire regular season span, but could they keep it up against the gauntlet of other Super Bowl contenders? The pressure of going this far without a loss, only to lose in the playoffs, would be devastating. The divisional round of the playoffs saw the Dolphins draw a matchup with the Cleveland Browns, a game described by players as the closest they had been to losing all year. The Miami Dolphins offense was completely smothered and it would require the no-name defense to take over. Together, the defense collected 5 interceptions against the Browns quarterback, and on special teams, rookie Charlie Babb would block a punt and return it for a touchdown. The game moved into the fourth quarter, and the Dolphins found themselves trailing 13-14. However, the Dolphins' running attack couldn't be stifled all night. Running back Jim Kiick finally broke free and scored the game-winning touchdown from 8 yards out. The Dolphins would advance to the conference championship with a score of 20-14. Their next opponent would be the dreaded Pittsburgh Steelers, who actually had home field advantage for this game as the NFL chose the home team based on a rotating schedule at the time. So Miami found themselves in a tough environment against a team who only a week earlier completed one of the greatest plays in NFL history, the Immaculate Reception. This Steelers team was coming in hot and seemingly had otherworldly forces on their side. And things seemed to be starting off offensively where they had left off in the divisional round for the Dolphins, with uninspired play. Earl Morrall had thrown an interception on the opening drive. Meanwhile, the Steelers would take an early lead thanks to an odd play in which Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw would fumble near the goal line, and then the ball recovered by an offensive lineman, Jerry Mullins, in the end zone for a Steelers touchdown. The Steelers' luck seemed to be holding from that previous outing. The Dolphins were desperate for a change of momentum and to move that winning pendulum back to their side. Things looked bleak late in the second quarter when the Dolphins were set to punt once again. But punter Larry Csonka would take matters into his own hands. He noticed the Steelers were in a formation that left the entire right side of the field nearly empty, so instead of kicking it away, he tucked the ball and started running. The Steelers defense was so unprepared for the fake that Csonka was literally running behind Steelers defenders up the field who thought the ball had been kicked. In his interview with Cameron Wolfe for his article Bowl, a Steelers cornerback described the play saying, quote, "The crowd was screaming and hollering. We thought somebody had blocked the punt. Then we see the punter running down the side of the field. Just a crucial mistake," end quote. Larry Csonka said, quote, "I remember standing down on the sideline and hearing the Steelers fans screaming, 'Turn around,' end quote." Larry Seipel would run 38 yards on the play and set up the game-tying touchdown just a few plays later. And Seipel described it best, saying, quote, "Sometimes you fall in a pile of shit and come out smelling like roses." But even with the game now tied at halftime, Coach Don Shula was still looking for a spark to truly turn the game over in Miami's favor. Shula decided it was finally time, and after weeks of recovery and practice, Bob Griese would return to be Miami's starting quarterback in the second half. And with that, the Dolphins offense was off to the races, scoring a touchdown in both the third and fourth quarter to win the game in thrilling fashion 21-17 to advance to Super Bowl VII. The championship game had proven to the Dolphins roster that they were winners. It strengthened their mental toughness and provided the confidence the players needed to know they belonged to be on the game's biggest stage once again. They had proven to be undefeated with only one game to go. They knew they were good enough to take the whole thing home. The team in their way? The NFC's Washington Redskins, who posted a 13-3 record heading into this game. So who would be posted as the betting underdogs in this game? The Miami Dolphins. The fuel was all there. They had battled this far and were not going to back down now. And yet somehow they were still being doubted by outsiders. Don Shula and his Dolphins were determined to throw that by the wayside and cement their legacy as the greatest team of all time. Bob Griese got to work early, throwing a 28-yard touchdown strike in the first quarter of the game. The Dolphins' run game would take care of business again in the second quarter with a goal line touchdown by Kiick. The Redskins would remain scoreless through the third quarter by that no-name Miami defense. Safety Jake Scott in particular would stand out, recording 2 interceptions during the game and even going on to be named Super Bowl MVP. And the game was looking to be a cakewalk for this special Miami team. The offense had drove down the field once again in the fourth quarter, and the team was setting up to kick a field goal. The score would be perfect, just like their winning record, 17-0. A 17-0 winning score to cap off the only undefeated team in NFL history. It sounds too good to be true, and it was, as what ensued was one of the most embarrassing mishaps in Super Bowl history. As Dolphins kicker Garo Yepremian kicked the ball, it got blocked, sending the ball flying back. Yepremian scrambled, picked up the loose ball, and then attempted to throw it down the field. Unfortunately, the ball slipped out of his hands and fumbled right into the waiting hands of a Washington defender, who returned it all the way back for a touchdown. The score was now 14-7, and technically now within reach of the Redskins to come back. But the no-name defense would step up one last time and sack Washington's quarterback on the final play of the game. The Miami Dolphins had escaped as Super Bowl champions. They had done it. The only team to ever win every single game from week 1 all the way to the Lombardi trophy. And 50 years later, no team has been able to match that incredible feat completed by Don Shula and his roster of players. They had prepared for perfection dating all the way back to training camp and proven themselves through adversity all season long and beat the best of the best the NFL had to offer in the playoffs to plant themselves on top of the world as the only perfect team, the greatest of all time. Thank you all so much for taking a trip down memory lane as we looked back at the 1972 undefeated Miami Dolphins. I urge you again to please check out the link in the description to Cameron Wolf's article about the team for more quotes and fun stories about this team that I did not include in the video. Now, where would you rank this team all time? Does it sit at the top? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more content just like this. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in the next one.